The very first thing we'll see, that what are the different interview questions we get into the Git related to Git, right? What are the different things we can expect in the interviews, where we will talk about the different set of Git questions. Now, in that case, what could be the interviewer, based what could be the interviewer ask us with respect to the Git. So there could be the questions with respect to, okay, what is Git? What is the difference between Git fork versus Git clone, right? What is the difference between Git fetch versus Git pull? What is the difference between Git merge versus Git rebase? How do you, what are the different challenges you face with respect to Git, right? What is the different branching strategy you put with respect to the Git? Okay, so what are the different commands you run over the Git, right? Or what, how do you handle the merge conflicts? So these are the questions, which are some of the topmost questions being asked in the interviews. And we will see all of these questions, we'll see that how we can answer these questions before we go ahead with any other thing. Yeah, so if we see here, right, I have created this document. I will be sharing it with every one of you who is part of here. And I have made this in the format, where like you can give this as a form of the answers, right? Where it says that, okay, what is the difference between Git fork versus Git clone, right? And when I say that, what is the difference between Git fork versus Git clone? So that means it says that, Git fork is what? It is something which is happened at GitHub level only, right? GitHub level means you can create a clone of a repository, or you can create a copy of a repository, right? Clone is not a right word to use. You can create a copy of a repository at the account level. When you do this thing, you do this thing when you don't have direct access to write anything into the repository. That means, if for example you have a GitHub repository, okay, which is, let's suppose, my repository. Now, it's my repository, and I have not given access to the any other people. Okay, I have just restricted access. But you want to contribute to that repository. You want to do some work on that repository, right? So you will do what? You will create a fork of that repository. So when you create a fork, it will allow you to create a copy of the repository, right? So for example, if let's say if I look for GitHub, let's say Spark repository. Okay. Now, this is Apache Spark repository. This is one of the open source projects, right? But when I say this is one of the open source project, I want to contribute into this. So if I want to contribute, I will do what? I say fork. Now, as soon as I fork, you see this is going to create a repository into my organization, okay, into my organization. So for example, I can give this as a name as Spark-Sachin, okay, and here I can say the testing the fork functionality for demo purpose, okay. And when I click on create fork, this will create a repository at my personal account. Now I can do what? I can basically contribute to this repository. I can add the code changes. I can create the pull request and get it merged with the main repository. Okay. So this is what we can do with the fork repository. Whereas what does clone do? Clone basically help you to copy or download the things into your local system. Okay. GitHub clone means anything which is happening at a local level. Means if I go here, code, and let's say if I do the SSH based clone this, and so in my terminal, I can write git clone. We have already covered this in the first session. When we do git clone, so that will basically copy or download this entire repository into my local system, into my own personal laptop. So yeah, this is git fork versus clone. Then there's the question that explain a scenario where you use git fork instead of git clone. What is the scenario? What is the process where you can use git fork rather than git clone? So I will say that, hey, I have used git fork when I contributed to DevOps project in my organization on GitHub. Again, you can change the answer based on the things. I've given the sample answer here. Since I didn't have right access to the original repository, I forked into my GitHub account, made changes, and then created a pull request from my fork to the upstream repository. Again, you don't have to rectify this, you don't have to just memorize this, but you have to understand the concept. You have to understand that okay, if this kind of scenario based question comes in for the git, so how should I answer, what should be my approach to answer that question. Likewise, git fetch versus git pull. Git pull, we saw, right, that git fetch will just get the changes. Okay, it will not merge the change. It will not combine the change with my main branch. But git pull will do what? It will fetch the change as well as it will merge it. Means it will get the copy of the change and it will merge it too, right? So then sometimes if I was the interviewer, I'll ask you, okay, that in that case, what command do you prefer? Do you prefer git fetch or git pull? And what is the reason? I would say that I prefer git pull. The reason, because that helps me to merge the change also, not only just fetch the changes from the upstream repository or from the remote repository, but it also allows me to merge the changes. So my favorite command is git pull compared to the git fetch here. So what is the difference between git rebase and git merge? We have already saw that rebase is what? It's something where you are moving your branch on top of another branch. Means if there is a branch which is a little ahead of your branch, so you're just moving that here, right, to ensure that commit history can be rewritten, right? We'll see this in the end of the session in the flow. Whereas git merge will allow you to create a new merge commit, and it will just merge the code changes as we saw last session, based on the pull request and the things. Okay, Moin, I know there would be something new for you here in this case, so you have to revisit the first session. We will, and as we discussed, we'll talk about that later. Okay. Now, then I've just added up these things for your explanation. Git branching strategy. How is the git branching strategy you use in your company, right? We have put up here that two again together. That okay, I use as a main, which is the default and a stable development. For the feature releases, we create a feature branches. For releases or for any changes, we do a release things. For hot fixes, we do this. Okay, and then I have explained a bit of things that what do you understand of this? What is the benefit of the strategies? What are the three challenges you face? Okay, this is one of the good question. People would be thinking, git में क्या challenge face कर सकता हूँ यार मैं, right? But that's not the thing. You can face the challenge. The very first challenge is with the merge conflict, right? That whenever you are doing a pull request or anything, you are facing a merge conflict issue, right? Where your changes are multiple changes at a time has happened, and you might be facing merge conflict. That is a place where you have to use git pull, git rebase, git fetch, all these commands to resolve that error. So we just have to tell them in theoretically that I utilize these commands to do this, right? Sometimes it could happen that there would be some multiple developers when they are working, right? And if we have not chosen a right merging strategy, there are messy commit history. Okay, so that's where, if you guys remember, we talked about and we saw about the squash merging strategy, right? The squash merging strategy is a one which we talked about, that okay, that is a strategy which we'll be using for the merge, so that all the commits can be squashed into the one single commit. Okay, now this is again third one is very limited one. Between the fork and a clone, we hardly use fork in the repositories until we are not going to work on some open source projects. Okay, and you can't use that as it is, so then you just use this. Okay, but in short, merge conflict is one of a challenge. Messy commit history is another challenge, right? These are the two challenges you can say that I have faced sometimes. Then it asks that okay, what was the recent challenge you faced in Git and how did you address it? Okay, interviewers just ask any of these questions. So when you say that, okay, what are the recent challenge you faced in the Git and how did you address it? You can talk about the branching strategy, right? You say that, okay, I joined the organization and I saw that the branching strategy was very, very bad, right? It was just messy. People were not really aware that, okay, how to, in which branch they should push the code. People are blindly pushing into the main. There was no branch protection rule added, there was no environment protection rule added in those things. So I as a developer, I as a DevOps engineer went there and I have basically set a Git governance process for them. Okay. Having or using this word known as a Git governance will emphasize or will add an extra plus 1 point in your answer. So make sure that you add this line that I have set up a Git governance for my organization where I have added up all the rules, where I have added up everything, right? Which we already discussed in session 1. Now, how do you handle merge conflicts? We have already talked about all of these things, right? What is the purpose of Git tags? Git tags, we saw that it's uses in a release version, which we'll see in the further CI/CD sessions. Now, moving further, we have talked about what is the purpose of .git folder, right? So, if the .git folder is something which basically contains all the metadata, all the config, all the object databases, right, and all those things, which is actually not which basically contains all the related informations for your Git repository. So you wanna use the same there. Okay. So yeah, these are the top 11 interview questions which you might face, as an experience, as a fresher, as an any kind of a resource. Trust me, if there shouldn't be any other question, but if you have any other question you come across, add this in this guide. I would be happy to know that.